I had worked as a babysitter in several houses before that night. Nothing special, you know? Just taking care of kids, giving them a bath, putting them to bed, and watching TV until the parents came home. But that night, things were different. The kids' mom, a polite woman who was always in a hurry, asked me to come over earlier because she and her husband were going to a birthday party. They left around 7 in the evening, and I stayed with the 3 kids, a 7-year-old boy, a 5-year-old girl, and the 2-year-old baby. It was a pretty simple routine, and I knew the kids well, so I didn't expect anything out of the ordinary. After giving them dinner, I put the baby in his crib and let the other 2 watch cartoons in the living room. They had a nice house, not too big, but you could tell they had money. Those big TVs, fancy wooden furniture. While the kids were entertained, I sat on the couch, took out my phone and started scrolling through messages and social media, not paying too much attention. Back then, I didn't know things were about to change. It was around 9 when the doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting anyone, but I thought maybe it was a neighbor or someone coming by to pick something up. I went to the door and looked through the peephole. It was a pizza delivery guy. He had a red cap on and was holding a pizza box under his arm. Nothing strange about that, right? But the weird thing was, I hadn't ordered any pizza. I opened the door just a crack, keeping the chain on. I asked who he was and what he wanted. He said he had a pizza delivery, already paid for. That threw me off because the kids' parents hadn't said anything about ordering food, and I definitely hadn't ordered anything. So, I told him there must be some mistake, that I wasn't expecting any pizza. He insisted, said someone in the house ordered it and that it was already paid for. I just needed to take it. I got suspicious because, aside from not ordering anything, he was acting kind of strange. You know when someone is really trying to convince you of something, like pushing it too much? I kept telling him I wasn't going to open the door, and he kept saying he was just doing his job, delivering pizza. I started getting nervous. I don't know, there was just this weird feeling. After a few more tries, he gave up and left. At least that's what I thought. I watched through the windows to make sure he was really leaving, and I saw his car, an old sedan slowly driving down the street. I thought that was the end of it. I went back to the couch, still feeling uneasy but trying not to worry too much. The kids were still watching TV, and I had to stay calm. But then about 20 minutes later, the doorbell rang again. This time, I didn't get up right away. I watched from the window, and there he was again, standing at the door. But this time, he didn't ring the bell. He just stood there for a few seconds and went back to his car. He did that 2 more times, driving slowly past the house, parking for a few seconds, and then driving off. My heart started racing for real now. It wasn't paranoia. This guy was coming back on purpose, like he was waiting for something. I started thinking a million things at once. What if he knew I was alone with the kids? What if he was waiting for the right moment to try something? I grabbed my phone and called the police. I told them what was happening, and the dispatcher told me to lock all the doors and windows and stay away from them until an officer arrived. I hung up and started locking everything one by one. The kids asked what was going on, and I made up a quick excuse, saying everything was fine. I just wanted to make sure the doors were locked. That was one of the longest hours of my life, waiting for the police to show up. Every time I heard a noise outside, my heart felt like it stopped. When I finally saw the police lights down the street, I felt a huge sense of relief, but I was still on edge. I went to the door and after confirming it was the cops, opened it. I told them everything again, every detail. They were polite, listened carefully, but they didn't seem too worried. They said they'd patrol the neighborhood, but at that moment there wasn't much else to do. Still, they told me to stay alert and call again if I saw anything suspicious. I thought that would be the end of it. Maybe the guy had left for good after seeing the police. The officers circled the block a few times, then left. I tried to calm down and put the kids to bed. It was almost midnight, and the parents still weren't home. The house was quiet, except for the TV on low in the living room. Around 1 in the morning, I was almost dozing off on the couch when I heard a car outside. I got up slowly and looked through the window. It was him again, the pizza guy. His car drove by slowly, this time not stopping. I was ready to call the police again, but he kept going and disappeared around the corner. Even then, the feeling that something was wrong didn't go away. When the kids' parents finally got home, I told them what had happened, and they were pretty freaked out, but also relieved I had called the police. The mom promised to install security cameras, and the dad said he'd talk to the neighbors to see if anyone else noticed anything strange. In the following days, I heard about other babysitters who had similar experiences. Some of them said the same guy had tried to deliver pizzas at other houses, always with the same excuse that it was paid for. But what really gave me chills was when, a few weeks later, we found out the police discovered that the pizza guy wasn't just some random delivery guy. He had actually been scouting houses where he knew babysitters were alone with kids. The police said he had done it in several cities, waiting for the right moment to break into the houses. I don't know what happened to him after that, if he got arrested or kept going, but the fact that he came back so many times that night still haunts me. After that night, I never took babysitting jobs in houses where I'd be alone with the kids again. No matter how much they paid, it just wasn't worth the risk. That day, I was babysitting 2 kids, as usual. It was a typical family house with toys scattered on the floor and school backpacks left by the entrance. The kids, a 6-year-old boy and a 4-year-old girl, were playing in the living room. They were energetic, like any kids their age, but I was used to the pace by now. After giving them their afternoon snack, I let them stay entertained with a puzzle on the coffee table while I tidied up the kitchen. You know how it is. The sink is always full of dishes after they finish eating. I was there, washing up, listening to the sound of the TV in the background when the landline phone rang. I was a little surprised because normally nobody called that number. Most of the families I worked with used cell phones for everything, and if it was something important, the parents would text me. If it was on the landline, it was probably telemarketing or a wrong number, I thought. But either way, I went to answer it. On the other end of the line, a man's voice, friendly, started talking. He said he was a friend of the parents, mentioned their names, and seemed to know a lot about the family. He talked about the dad's work, the car the mom drove, and even brought up a recent trip the family had taken. That caught me off guard because he really seemed to know a lot. So he said he'd be stopping by soon to drop off something the parents had forgotten. At first, I thought it was a little strange, but the way he spoke with all those details made it sound legit. Who else would know so much about the family? Despite a slight feeling of unease, I agreed and said I'd be at the house, not giving it much more thought. I hung up the phone and went back to what I was doing, still thinking it was just a normal errand. The kids were calm, and time went by. When I glanced at the clock, I realized it was almost dinner time, and I started thinking about what to make. I went to the fridge, grabbed some ingredients, and started preparing something simple. Mac and cheese, the kids' favorite. I was nearly finished when I heard the doorbell ring. My first reaction was to take a quick peek through the side window that overlooked the front porch. It was a man, probably in his 40s, wearing an old jacket and a baseball cap. He wasn't holding anything, which immediately raised a red flag because, from what I understood from the call, he was supposed to be dropping something off for the parents. I went to the door but didn't open it right away. I kept it closed and spoke through the door. I asked who he was, and he said he was the friend who had called earlier. At that moment, something didn't feel right. He was nervous, you could tell by his voice, and he kept looking around like he was checking to see if anyone was watching him. That started to make me suspicious. If he really was a friend of the family, why was he so on edge? And why didn't he have anything with him? I told him I was busy with the kids and couldn't open the door right then. He insisted, saying he only needed a minute, that the parents had asked him to drop by. But the way he was talking made me even more uncomfortable. I started asking questions. What are you dropping off? Why didn't the parents tell me you were coming? With every question, he got more nervous, stammering his answers and changing the subject. That was the last straw for me. I told him I was going to call the parents to confirm, and suddenly he said it wasn't necessary, that he had to leave. and he turned around so fast he almost tripped on the front step. That gave me a bad feeling in my gut. Something was really wrong. I ran to grab my cell phone and called the parents. I explained the situation and they were immediately worried. The mom told me they hadn't asked anyone to stop by, that there was no one who needed to leave anything at the house. My heart started racing. I knew I'd made the right decision by not opening the door, but now I was genuinely scared. While I was still on the phone with them, I decided to call the police. I didn't know who this guy was, but it was clear he wasn't there for any good reason. The kids were still playing in the living room, unaware of what was going on, which was a relief. But I couldn't stop looking out the windows, afraid he might come back. The police arrived quickly, and when they got there, I told them everything I could. I talked about the strange phone call, how the man knew details about the family, and how he got nervous when I started asking questions. They took a look around the neighborhood, but the man was already gone. In the end, they didn't find anything suspicious nearby, but they told me I did the right thing by not opening the door and calling them. After the police left, I tried to calm down and get back to my routine. I finished making the kids dinner and sat them down to eat, but that feeling of unease stuck with me for the rest of the night. I kept looking out the windows every few minutes, afraid he might come back. When the parents came home later, I told them everything that had happened in more detail. They were horrified, especially since he knew so much about the family. The mom promised that from then on, only she or her husband would call me directly for anything, and they said they were going to install security cameras around the house. For the next few days, I couldn't stop thinking about that man and how he knew so much about the family. It left me paranoid for a while. I kept wondering how he got all that information. Had he been watching the house before he called? Or did he have access to some kind of database with personal details? The idea that he might have been waiting for the right moment to get into the house terrified me. For a long time after that incident, I avoided answering calls from numbers I didn't recognize, and whenever I started a new babysitting job, I made sure to ask the parents if anyone might be stopping by. I was always on high alert, expecting the worst, and it completely changed the way I viewed my job as a babysitter. Even now, years later, I remember that night like it was yesterday. The feeling of vulnerability I felt in that moment never really left me. I never found out what that man truly wanted, but the fact that he fled when I mentioned calling the parents was enough to convince me that I was in danger. After that experience, I was more cautious about who I let into the homes where I worked. It didn't matter how convincing someone's story was. I knew I had to trust my instincts. And that night taught me that sometimes it's better to be cautious than to take risks, because things aren't always what they seem.